This video is not here to motivate you. It's not here to inspire you. And it's not here to give you habits or tips. This video is here to show you something uncomfortable. Most people don't end up in the wrong life because they failed. They end up there because nothing ever forced them to stop. This video is about how a life is built quietly, not through big mistakes, but through small tolerations, small delays, small compromises that feel harmless. In this video, you'll see why understanding doesn't change your life, why awareness can trap you, why waiting feels safe but costs you years, why identity pulls you back even when you try to change, and why most people wake up one day in a life they never chose. This is a psychological journey, not a lecture. We'll talk about time, about identity, about the quiet moments you ignore, about the internal line that once crossed changes everything. If you're looking for motivation, this is not that video. But if you've ever felt like you understand everything and still haven't moved, this video is for you. Watch it slowly. Don't skip, because this is not about information. It's about recognition.
Your discipline builds your future. Welcome to Clartify.
Nothing ruined your life, and that is exactly why it happened. There was no disaster, no collapse, no dramatic moment that forced you to stop and look at yourself. There were only ordinary days, reasonable decisions, and delays that felt logical at the time. Human lives do not fall apart loudly, they normalize quietly. Life rarely changes because of one big decision. It changes because of what you tolerate every single day without noticing the cost. You do not wake up and choose the wrong life. You allow it slowly, piece by piece, compromise by compromise. You stay in situations longer than you respect because nothing hurts enough to force movement. You accept routines that drain you because they feel familiar. You postpone changes because now never feels urgent enough. And each delay feels harmless on its own. That is why it is dangerous. The human brain is not designed to search for truth or fulfillment. It is designed to keep you alive. Survival is its priority, not meaning. And survival prefers familiarity. Familiarity feels safe even when it is limiting, even when it slowly erases your potential. This is why familiar discomfort feels safer than unfamiliar growth. The brain would rather keep you in a life you dislike than push you into a life it does not recognize. Sudden pain creates action, but gradual pain creates adaptation. Adaptation is powerful. It allows humans to survive extreme conditions. But the same mechanism that keeps you alive can quietly steal your future. When pain increases slowly, the nervous system adjusts. What once felt unacceptable becomes normal. What once felt temporary becomes permanent. This is how years disappear quietly, without collapse, without warning, without resistance. At some point, something subtle shifts inside you. You stop trying to change your life, not consciously, not dramatically, but gradually. And instead, you start explaining it. You explain why this phase makes sense, why waiting is logical, why now is not the right time, why later will be different. Explanation feels intelligent. It feels mature. It feels controlled. But explanation has a hidden cost. Explanation replaces honesty. As long as you can explain your life, you do not have to confront the feeling that something is wrong. Psychologists call this rationalization, the mind's way of avoiding discomfort while still feeling responsible and smart. Most people are not living the life they want. They are living the life they know how to justify. They are not unhappy enough to panic and not fulfilled enough to stop questioning. So they remain suspended in between. And that middle space is dangerous because nothing forces change there. There is an illusion that keeps people trapped for years, the belief that changing circumstances will change their life. You think a new job will fix it, a new city, a new relationship. But changing circumstances does not change identity. Identity survives environment. The nervous system is loyal to who you have been, not to who you imagine becoming. Familiar identity feels safe, even when it limits you. That is why people escape one situation only to recreate another version of it somewhere else. Different place, different faces, same silence, same avoidance, same explanations. Motivation fails here because motivation is temporary energy, but identity is gravity. Gravity always wins when nothing deeper shifts. There is always a moment that could change everything. It is never dramatic. It is small and quiet. A moment where something inside you says, this is not it. Not emotionally, not loudly, just clearly. Philosophers call this existential awareness. It is the moment you realize you are participating in a life you do not fully respect. You do not feel panic. You feel honesty. Most people ignore this moment, not because they do not hear it, but because listening would require letting go of who they have been comfortable being. So they wait for clarity, for confidence, for permission. But waiting is not neutral. Waiting is a direction. And life continues to build itself around the delay. One day you wake up and nothing feels shocking. This life feels familiar, not because you chose it, but because you stayed. You did not fail into this life. You tolerated your way into it. Small compromises, daily delays, silent agreements with yourself. Over time, those agreements become identity, and identity becomes destiny. When meaning is missing, people distract themselves with comfort. Comfort makes time pass faster without changing direction. The future is not something you arrive at one day. It is something you slowly live into through what you tolerate, what you delay, and what you explain. If nothing changes, this is the life you will wake up in. Not suddenly, but quietly. One normal day at a time. At this stage, most people still believe they have time. Time feels abstract. It feels flexible. It feels like something that can always be reorganized later. This is one of the most dangerous illusions of the human mind. Time does not disappear loudly. It does not announce itself. It dissolves into routine. Days repeat. Weeks blur. Years compress. And because nothing dramatic happens, the mind assumes nothing serious is being lost. But something is always being exchanged. You are trading possibility for familiarity. You are trading potential for predictability. And you rarely notice the cost while it is happening. The brain has a powerful ability called temporal discounting. It means the mind undervalues the future compared to the present. Immediate comfort always feels more real than long-term consequence. This is why people choose relief over direction, rest over effort, explanation over confrontation. It is not a moral failure. It is a biological bias. But when this bias runs your life unchecked, it quietly decides your future without asking for permission. Most people think procrastination is about laziness. It is not. Procrastination is about emotional regulation. When a task threatens identity, meaning, or self-image, the nervous system delays it to avoid discomfort. Delay creates relief. Relief teaches the brain that avoidance is safe. Over time, this pattern becomes automatic. You are no longer choosing delay. Delay is choosing you. And because the relief feels real, the long-term cost feels imaginary. This is why self-aware people often stay stuck longer than confused people. Confusion hurts. Pain creates urgency. Awareness creates calm. Calm creates tolerance. You understand your patterns. You understand your psychology. You understand what needs to change. And that understanding becomes a substitute for movement. You feel involved without acting. You feel intelligent without risking failure. Awareness becomes a soft prison. Comfortable, quiet, invisible. There is another illusion that keeps people trapped, the belief that clarity comes before action. People wait to feel ready, to feel confident, to feel certain. But clarity rarely precedes action. Clarity follows action. Confidence is not a prerequisite. It is a byproduct. The nervous system does not gain safety from thinking. It gains safety from evidence. Evidence only comes from doing. When you wait for clarity, you are waiting for a feeling that only action can produce. So waiting becomes permanent. Over time, the cost of this waiting accumulates internally. You may still function. You may still succeed in small ways, but something inside you begins to shrink. You stop trusting yourself, not consciously, subtly. You make promises to yourself and break them quietly. You tell yourself you will act later, and later never comes. Each broken promise weakens self-trust, and without self-trust, action feels heavier. Not because the task is harder, but because you no longer believe yourself. This is how identity quietly degrades. Identity is not who you say you are. Identity is who you prove yourself to be through repetition. When you repeatedly delay what matters, your nervous system learns something dangerous, that your words do not require action. This creates internal fragmentation. Part of you wants more. Another part expects disappointment. And when those parts conflict, the system freezes. Freezing is not fear. Fear is loud. Fear panics. Freezing is silent. It is the body saying, I don't know which version of you to support. When identity is unclear, the safest option is to do nothing. This is why people can feel motivated and paralyzed at the same time. Motivation pulls forward. Identity pulls backward. And backward usually wins because it feels familiar. There is a quiet grief that begins to form here. Not grief for what you lost, but grief for what you never allowed to exist. You sense versions of yourself that were possible, lives you could have lived, paths you could have taken. And instead of mourning them openly, you distract yourself. You stay busy. You consume content. You stay occupied. Distraction keeps the grief unconscious, but unconscious grief still weighs on the system. The longer this goes on, the harder it becomes to imagine a different life. Not because it is impossible, but because unfamiliar futures feel unsafe. The nervous system prefers predictable dissatisfaction over uncertain possibility. This is why people often defend the very lives that limit them. They rationalize their constraints. They minimize their desires. They call ambition unrealistic, not because it is true, but because it reduces internal tension. Eventually, something strange happens. You stop imagining change vividly. You still talk about it. You still think about it, but you no longer feel it. The future becomes vague, abstract, distant, and vague futures have no power. Only vivid futures create movement. When the future loses clarity, the present becomes heavier, and the longer you stay, the more permanent it feels. This is the point where many people confuse acceptance with peace. Acceptance feels calm. Peace feels alive. Acceptance numbs. Peace energizes. But numbness is easier to maintain than aliveness. Aliveness requires risk. It requires exposure. It requires becoming someone unfamiliar. And unfamiliar still feels dangerous to the nervous system. So life continues. Not because you chose it, but because nothing interrupted it. Nothing forced a reckoning. Nothing made staying impossible. This is why the most dangerous lives are not chaotic ones. They are stable ones that quietly betray the person living them. Nothing explodes, nothing collapses, and because of that, nothing demands change. The tragedy is not that people fail. The tragedy is that many never truly try. Not because they are incapable, but because they adapted too well. They adapted to dissatisfaction. They adapted to delay. They adapted to a life that never required them fully. And adaptation feels like strength. Until you realize what it cost. The future does not arrive suddenly. It settles in, slowly, through repetition, through avoidance, through comfort, through silence. And by the time it feels real, it feels familiar. Not chosen, just lived into. Eventually, something inside you starts to fracture. Not loudly, not suddenly. There is no breakdown, no crisis, no dramatic moment that forces clarity. The fracture is quiet. It begins as a subtle tension between who you are living as and who you know you could be. You still function. You still perform. You still move through life. But something inside you no longer aligns, and misalignment creates fatigue that rest cannot fix. This is where most people misinterpret their exhaustion. They think they are tired because they work too much, or because life is stressful, or because they lack discipline. But the deepest exhaustion does not come from effort. It comes from self-betrayal, from repeatedly ignoring your own internal signals, from living in ways that contradict what you know about yourself. The nervous system experiences this contradiction as threat, and when threat persists without resolution, the system shuts down initiative. At this stage, you may notice something unsettling. You no longer trust your own impulses. You hesitate before simple decisions. You overthink small actions. You delay obvious steps. This is not because you lack intelligence. It is because your system has learned that action does not lead to congruence. You have acted before and still stayed stuck. So the body learns caution. It learns restraint. It learns paralysis. This is the origin of the freeze. The freeze is not fear. Fear is loud. Fear pushes you to escape. The freeze is quiet. It is the body saying, I don't know which future to support. When identity is fragmented, movement feels unsafe. You feel pulled in opposite directions. One part of you wants expansion. Another part expects disappointment. And when the nervous system cannot predict safety, it chooses stillness. Most people try to break this freeze with force. They push harder. They consume more advice. They demand discipline. But pressure does not resolve identity conflict. Pressure intensifies it. The more you push without internal alignment, the more resistance you create. This is why many people experience cycles of motivation followed by collapse. Not because motivation is weak, but because identity has not moved. Here is the part few people are willing to confront. You do not resist change because you are afraid of failure. Failure hurts, but pain moves people. You resist change because success would require you to become someone unfamiliar. And unfamiliar identities feel dangerous to the nervous system, even when they promise a better life. Your current identity has proof. Years of evidence that you survived, that you coped, that you functioned. The new identity you imagine has none. No history, no repetition, no safety signals. So when pressure increases, your system retreats to what it knows. Not because it wants comfort, but because it wants certainty. This is why people sabotage themselves right before meaningful change. Not at the beginning, but at the edge. When they are close enough that identity feels threatened, they miss deadlines. They create distractions. They find reasons to stop. And afterwards, they feel confused and ashamed. They think something is wrong with them. But nothing is wrong. The system did exactly what it was designed to do: protect continuity. Over time, this pattern creates a deeper form of pain. Not acute suffering, but existential guilt. A quiet sense that you are not honoring something essential. You feel it when things slow down, late at night, in moments of silence. It is not loud enough to panic, but it is heavy enough to drain you. Many people spend years trying to silence this feeling. They stay busy. They consume. They chase stimulation, anything to avoid stillness. Because stillness brings honesty. And honesty threatens the life you have adapted to. At some point, however, avoidance stops working. Not because the feeling grows louder, but because you grow tired of running from it. You begin to sense that no amount of explanation will remove it. No amount of comfort will dissolve it. And this is where something shifts. This shift is not motivation. Motivation excites. This shift settles. It feels serious, calm, almost final. You stop asking how to optimize your life. You start asking whether the life you are living is one you can respect. This question changes everything. This is the moment when the cost of staying the same begins to outweigh the fear of becoming someone new. Not dramatically, quietly. You do not feel brave. You feel done. Done negotiating. Done postponing. Done explaining. Most people never reach this point because they escape before it forms. They numb it. They distract it. They intellectualize it. But if you stay with it long enough, it becomes unavoidable. And once it does, something irreversible happens internally. You no longer see going back as relief. You see it as betrayal. And the nervous system cannot unsee that. This is the threshold, not of action, but of decision. Action may come later, slowly, imperfectly. But once this internal line is crossed, you cannot return to unconscious tolerance. You may still struggle. You may still hesitate, but you are no longer asleep. The most dangerous phase of life is not confusion. Confusion hurts. Pain creates movement. The most dangerous phase is adaptation without awareness. But once awareness becomes embodied, once it sinks into the nervous system, it demands resolution. This is not where change finishes. This is where it begins to become unavoidable. At some point, the mind runs out of strategies. Explanation no longer soothes. Distraction no longer works. Comfort no longer numbs. You may still function, still move, still appear normal on the outside, but inside something has closed. Not collapsed. Closed. Like a door that no longer negotiates. This is not panic. Panic is loud. This is finality. Quiet, serious, and heavy. This is the moment most people never talk about. Not because it is rare, but because it is uncomfortable. It is the moment when staying the same begins to hurt more than changing. Not in theory, in the body. You feel it as a weight, a pressure, a sense that continuing like this would require betraying yourself in a way you can no longer ignore. Up until this point, you tolerate almost anything. You tolerated frustration. You tolerated emptiness. You tolerated quiet dissatisfaction, because familiar pain feels safer than uncertain effort. But this moment is different. This moment does not ask for motivation. It does not ask for discipline. It does not ask for courage. It simply arrives, usually quietly. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no breakdown, no explosion, no crisis that justifies change. There is only a realization, a simple, heavy realization. I cannot keep living like this, not because life is unbearable, but because it feels dishonest. You realize that the version of your life you are living no longer matches what you know inside, and that mismatch becomes unbearable to carry. This is where people misunderstand what real change feels like. They think it feels empowering. It rarely does. It feels sobering, calm, serious. Like something inside you has stopped arguing. You are no longer debating whether you should change. You are no longer negotiating with comfort. You are no longer asking for permission. Something has settled. The nervous system asks a new question now. Not, is change safe, but is staying the same survivable? And when the answer quietly becomes no, movement begins. Not explosive movement. Not dramatic transformation. But irreversible movement. This is why real change does not feel exciting. Excitement is unstable. This feels grounded. You are not energized. You are resolved. And resolution is far more powerful than motivation. Motivation rises and falls. Resolution stays. At this point, people often expect clarity about what to do next. That clarity rarely comes immediately. Action may still be messy, slow, imperfect. But something fundamental has shifted. You no longer see going back as rest. You see it as regression. You no longer see delay as patience. You see it as avoidance. And the nervous system cannot unsee this once it is felt. This is why people who reach this point often say, I don't know exactly what I'm doing yet, but I know what I'm not doing anymore. That certainty is enough. You do not need a full plan. You do not need confidence. You do not need guarantees. You only need the line that has been crossed internally. This line cannot be forced. It cannot be hyped. It cannot be manufactured by videos, books, or speeches, but it can be recognized. And recognition is everything. Because once you recognize that staying the same costs you your self-respect, there is no comfortable way back. Many people try to talk themselves out of this moment. They say it will pass, that they are overthinking, that they should be grateful. Gratitude is not the issue. Comfort is not the issue. The issue is integrity. You can be grateful and still dishonest with yourself. And honesty, once it becomes embodied, demands alignment. This is where discipline suddenly appears without being summoned. Not because you trained it, but because resistance disappeared. You are no longer fighting yourself. You are no longer split between desire and avoidance. You are simply unwilling to continue betraying what you know. This is also why people who reach this point often become quieter. They talk less about plans, less about goals, less about change. Because talking is no longer the point. Alignment is. The most important thing to understand is this. This moment does not guarantee success. It does not promise ease. It does not remove struggle. But it does something far more important. It removes unconscious tolerance. And once tolerance is gone, life cannot quietly build itself against your will anymore. You may still stumble. You may still hesitate. You may still feel fear. But you are no longer asleep. And waking up is irreversible. Most people search their entire lives for motivation, for discipline, for confidence. But none of those are what change a life. Lives change when self-betrayal becomes more painful than uncertainty. This video was never about habits, or productivity, or success. It was about honesty. The kind of honesty that closes doors. The kind that removes options. You do not need to do anything tonight. You do not need to make promises. You do not need to feel inspired. All you need is to notice one thing, whether the life you are living is one you can continue to respect. Because the future is not something you arrive at one day. It is something you live into, quietly, daily, without announcements. If nothing changes, this is the life you will wake up in. And if something inside you feels different right now, not emotional, not motivated, just clear, that is not inspiration. That is the end of negotiation. If this video did its job, you don't feel motivated. You feel quiet. Quiet in a serious way. Not because you learned something new, but because you recognized something true. You're thinking about your life, about what you've been tolerating, about what you've been explaining, about what you've been delaying. This video was never here to push you. It was here to remove something dangerous, your ability to lie to yourself without feeling dishonest. You don't need to change everything tonight. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need confidence. Just notice one thing, whether the life you're living is one you can continue to respect. Because once that question becomes real, there is no comfortable way back. If this video helped you see something clearly, take a second and like it. Not for the algorithm, but to mark the moment you stopped negotiating with yourself. And if you want more videos like this, videos that don't motivate you, but confront you, subscribe. This channel is not about feeling better. It's about seeing clearly. And if you need this message again one day, come back to this video. Some things don't change your life the first time you hear them. They change it when you're finally ready to listen.
Thank you for watching. If you're ready to upgrade your mind and build unshakable discipline, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. More powerful lessons are coming. Stay disciplined. Stay Clarify.